All right, it looks like the participant entry point is starting to slow down some, so we will go ahead and get started. I know you guys are all anticipating the beginning of the webinar. Um, First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to our March webinar, One Team, How Everyone Wins a Complex Sale. My name is Laura Hall, and I'm VP of Marketing here at Revigy, and we are very excited today to have Mark Sellers on. He is a sales trainer and coach, author of The Funnel Principle. Got a couple books there I know he's going to talk about just briefly here at the beginning, but we're really looking forward to this session today and talk about how the buying journey has changed a little bit and how we can align our sales processes better to fit what our buyers are going through. So with that, I will let you intro yourself. Mark, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Great to be here with you guys at Revigy. You're doing some good work, and I'm looking forward to our topic today.
Great.
Shall I take it away?
It's all you.
Okay, terrific. So welcome to everybody, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you. Your time is busy, and I've thought through what I want to convey carefully to all of you today, and I'm sure you're going to walk away with some nuggets. So let's get into it. We are going to really focus on this whole idea of the stakeholders. Stakeholders that you call on, that you're trying to get access to, that you're trying to identify, to work that group, that consensus selling stuff that CEB Gartner tells us about. That's really the focus today. So we're going to start off, though, with this idea of the customer buying journey, because I think that provides some really good context for that task of identifying and gaining access to and working in that group of stakeholders. At some point, we have to kind of pivot and say, who are the really key stakeholders that you've got to get to, for obvious reasons. And then kind of finish this whole thing up by making some comments about the process you use. The process you use to do some of the stuff, really, really important. Because let's be honest, I mean, there may be a few new things we cover today, but I'm assuming this audience has heard a lot, has read a lot, is probably seasoned to a degree. So I think the process piece and how you actually do this stuff that you're supposed to do, very, very important. So I definitely want to cover that as well today. All right, so the source of my perspective, so many of you may not know who I am. So I've been doing B2B training and consulting and coaching for about 25 years. Started out with the Miller Heiman Company back in 1997. And a lot of you probably have heard of Miller Heiman. They do great training, good outfit, all B2B, all complex selling kinds of stuff. I left them in 2008 and did something called the Funnel Principle, and then have since done that for about 130 global sales teams. I've had the privilege of working in a wide variety of industries and channels and things, some small to medium-sized companies and some large companies, multi-billion-dollar businesses. So I did write this book called The Funnel Principle in 2008, and I introduced this idea of a customer buying journey model called the buy cycle funnel. So today, you hopefully a lot of you have heard of a customer buying journey, or you might have heard it called customer mapping, if that sort of thing, different from stakeholder mapping, but customer mapping. So our buy cycle funnel is really intended to identify that journey that customers take from the time they decide that something's wrong, something is an opportunity they want to pursue, all the way to a purchase. The thing that I really wanted to demonstrate to the marketplace was this so-called misalignment of selling activities. So when you think about how important it is to be smart about what you do I get on the plane? Do I do I bring the 3 or 4 people, technical support? I mean, big expenses of selling activities. And I often saw my clients were doing these kinds of things, maybe too early. They weren't justifying that the customer was at some particular place in their journey that really justified why they should be doing that. So that's really kind of the net of the buy cycle funnel and the concepts in the funnel principle. Make sure that the selling activities that you invest in and deploy, make sure you really are confident that now's the time to spend 3 days on a quote. Now's the time to go make the visit and bring an army of people perhaps with you. I did also write another book called Blind Spots, the Hidden Killer of Sales Coaching a couple of years ago. And I don't want to talk too much about that, but this is basically not a sales process book, but more so a book on sales leadership. So hopefully we have a lot of sales leaders out there and you're looking for ways to really connect better with your people. Connect, maybe give them a good, spank on the backside, or maybe they need to be stroked, whatever that connection might be, finding ways to do that. So that's blind spots. All right. So for all of you, you're probably focused on, the one thing that really matters in sales, and that is hitting your quota, right? Now, how you might be getting there could be different. Some of you might be saying that the key to quota for you this year, given the tough year that a lot of people have come off of, is to keep what you have. That's great. Maybe you don't have a lot of attrition. Maybe you just have to grow a little bit more, but you really need to keep what you have. Okay. Maybe for some of you, it's about selling more to your existing customers. Maybe you do need to penetrate those accounts better, get to other, what we call account buying segments, other locations, other facilities, other branches, et cetera. So maybe that's your strategy. Maybe for others, you've got to do a lot of new customer acquisition. Maybe there's a lot of attrition that's taken place and you need to backfill all of that and get the 6%, 8%, 10% growth on top of that management is demanding that you get. And then finally, maybe some of you are saying, we need to actually create new products. And that's the way that we're going to achieve our quota. One of my clients calls that CBI, customer back innovation. So they don't hide themselves in a room and create and then come out and say, look what we have. They engage with the customer and say, what are you trying to do? And maybe we can create and modify some products for you to help you do that. So could be any of those. And maybe for some of you, it's a combination of those as well. So despite, your situation, the strategy you need, I think that how we approach this stakeholder challenge is going to be pretty similar. Okay. But I wanted to at least recognize that. All right. So if that's your strategy, then, what possibly is getting in the way? What are the obstacles? I'm only going to hit this and I'm going to run because I think we're all getting tired and fatigued about the pandemic and what effect the pandemic is having on our businesses. Of course, we've all felt it. And at the same time, we have to, in some ways, move on. So I want to acknowledge it. It's affected a lot of my clients, and I'm sure it's affected all of you to some degree. But let's talk about some other things that might be getting in the way. CEB Gartner has told us, going back to 2013, that there are more stakeholders that we have to call on. And in 2016, they updated the 5.4 on average to 6.8. I also think that we're selling to a more informed stakeholder. No surprise, right? And we are to blame a little bit for that because there's so much information that companies are putting out on their products and maybe their applications and things. Then it kind of delays the needs in some cases for a stakeholder to pick up the phone, email a salesperson. I think finding the authority and the high influence, not an easy thing to do. Maybe the technology people are hiding behind. Maybe it's a bit pandemic induced, but the titles don't tell us everything. So we have to get clever. We have to triangulate information to find out who really is driving this decision, who has a lot of influence that I need to get to. We'll talk a little bit about the 57% leads that, again, CEB tells us about, the 57% of the decision-making process that a lot of companies go through on average before they contact the salesperson. So that could be getting in the way for you as well. Access to stakeholders can be a challenge. And of course, everybody's busy, whether it's good busy or frantic, chaotic busy for maybe not good reasons. And just breaking through all of that noise to say, hey, could you spend a little time with me over the next, couple of weeks? I want to learn about your business. I want to share some insights, that sort of thing. So any number of these perhaps are challenges that you are facing. So that said, I think we're going to have a poll now, aren't we, Laura?
We are. It should be popping up in your screens momentarily. There we go. I'm seeing it pop up here. While we wait, I neglected to mention at the beginning of the call that we do want this session to be interactive. So if you have questions as we go through, please just pop them in the chat, and I will continually interrupt Mark to ask questions of him. And speaking of, we do have a question right now related to the buying group. You know, obviously we have this pandemic hangover and everything has changed. We're personally seeing finance entering the buyer group even more than we have before. Do you foresee it reverting back to what it looked like pre-2020?
No. Next question. No,
All right.
I'm just kidding. You know, all of my clients, I think that they've seen this, where the person who has that financial authority, where it used to be here in the organization, it's a notch higher, or maybe even a couple of notches higher. So that, I think, is one that I don't think companies are going to relinquish that anytime soon. You know, I mean, eventually, when COVID is really in our rear window, but for now, I don't see it changing much.
Yeah, I agree. Now we have some results popping up. Looks like here buying group has changed for the vast majority of you. 65% it has expanded. A 27% has stayed the same, and there's a lucky 8% where it's gotten smaller. Hopefully that means it's easier, not more difficult.
You know, there's always some people out there that you just can't stand to be around, right? That lucky 8%, but 65% it's expanded. So yeah. So again, you know, people pay Gartner a lot of money for that research. So it's good to know that they're right about that. So, all right. So let's get into some things that we can do then to really get our arms around these stakeholders and the challenges. Let's start off with this customer buying journey concept. All right. So let's start off real simple. Let's define what a customer buying journey is. It's very simple and yet very important. Set of steps, set of milestones, an individual can go through, or a group of people can go through, these stakeholders, when they make a purchase. To me, it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. But it needs to be defined so that we can begin to socialize it. So to begin to socialize it. So one of the interesting things to point out about the buying journey is to compare it kind of current day, best practice, new standard, customer buying journey as a way to understand how a purchase is made. Compare that to the traditional sales process. And I write about this in my book, but the book's 12 years old, still relevant, thank goodness, but I've learned a lot more than I knew back then. And one of the things that's real clear about the differences is when you see the top, and hopefully that's big enough you can see the traditional process. Typically those stages are defined by things that salespeople do, or things that the sales team does. We prospect, we qualify, we make presentations, we send out our samples, we do our demos, we quote, we close, we put the heavy presentation on, whatever, and then it becomes a sold piece of business. I'm not here to tell anybody that that's a recipe for disaster, because I know it still goes on to some degree today, and somehow that's still successful. You know, fantastic. I do believe, though, through my experience in watching my clients, that there's a better way. And when you map that process, if you will, by the things your customers have to commit to doing, then a lot of good things are more likely to happen. So to be clear, we're saying now those stages are defined by things the customer is doing. The customer defines the problem. The customer defines the business impact. The customer commits to buy. The customer defines the solution parameters. The customer looks at and defines the solution options, and then they make a purchase. That's really what is happening. And that was the kind of aha for me when I first created this buy cycle funnel now over 20 years ago. I said, it's interesting when I stopped to think about it, which I hadn't for a long time, when people make a purchase, they don't go through our sales process or anybody's sales process. They go through a buying journey process or a buying process. And yet we didn't talk about that when we did training. And so to me, that was the big missing piece. And it was an aha. If we add that now, if we add that piece and then line up our selling activities to those customer stages, wow, now we can be a lot more effective. For example, if I tended to see customers quoting too early, still see it today, sending out samples or doing a trial of sorts and not getting any commitment, still doing it today, right? When I see that happening, I'd say, I think it's a little early. What commitments have you seen the customer make that warrants you giving them the sample and then asking them, so you give me a time frame. Are you going to use that sample in 2 weeks? Is the trial going to be finished in a month? I mean, I'll work with you on this. I'm not dictating or demanding anything, but I need to know because I'm going to manage to that, right? To those expectations. So it may seem subtle, but it's a huge, huge difference. And again, it goes back to why I got into this in the first place. I started to see my clients more and more getting way out ahead of their skis, doing things that just frankly, they weren't justified that fully. Something else that CEB gave us in the Challenger sale book is this idea of 57%, which when I heard at the time, I said, this is terrific. It's, in good Gartner, CEB Gartner fashion, it's sexy. It's a great marketing kind of thing, right? Because it gets people thinking. And the idea here, if you haven't heard of this, is that customers will routinely go through 57% of the decision-making journey before they, guess what, contact a salesperson. And now they say it's even worse than that. Now Brent Adamson at Gartner is saying it's more like 75%. And they've got, data and research to show this. So when I saw this, I said, this is great, but I think it's missing something. Because if I'm a sales leader and I say, geez, we have a lot of customers who are going through the buying journey without us. That's not good. What am I going to say? What's my advice? I really don't know other than go fix that. But when you have a buying journey model, you can now say, well, hang on a second. What does 57% of the buying journey look like when we slice up that journey into these customer buying stages? Well, this is the question I ask my clients when we kick off our programs with them. And I say, now that you know these stages and how we define them, what would you define as 57% of the way through? And almost always they say the customer has at least committed to buy. In other words, not committed to buy from us necessarily, but they've committed to buy from somebody, which is a big deal because that's very different from somebody who seems eager and seems really fed up with the problems they have, but they have no authority to do something about it. Or the person who has authority says, we have a lot more problems to deal with. So if that's the case, now we can direct sales organizations to say, okay, we've got to do a better job of understanding this journey that they're on. If we find for the first time these leads, or if we can get in early, now we kind of know the steps that we need to take to not lose them along the process. All right, so all of this, when we think about the stakeholders, I think there are a number of key takeaways for us when you have a customer buying journey foundation that helps you with this stakeholder management stuff. Excuse me. So first of all, the buying journey by definition defines who the stakeholders are. So if you're wondering who might be involved, I say, understand the buying journey. So let's take a simple example. If somebody has signing authority for $100,000 and your solution is going to run $125,000, then you're not talking to the person who has that economic buyer, or what we call the PFA, person with financial authority. They don't have that. So you got to go find the person who can have signing authority for $125,000, right? So that's really, really key. Then knowing how to engage with that individual typically wants to talk about top line, bottom line, and risk. Now, the person who you may have thought in the past was that person, but now you realize doesn't have signing authority. Well, they may not be so focused on top line, bottom, and risk because that's not the role they play. Well, what are they focused on? Well, maybe it's focused on how user friendly it is, or how reliable it is, or service after the fact. So you need to engage with that stakeholder that way, right? So I think it's really a role kind of thing, understanding through the buying journey, what roles do these stakeholders play? And then with all of that, I think it puts you in a much better position to know how all of them are working together. Easier said than done, but you've identified who's who in the zoo, so to speak. You've understood better their roles and how to engage with them. You should be in a better position, therefore, to know how they need to work together.
Hey, Mark, got
Yeah.
a couple questions here.
Yes.
First one, I think this person comes from a scenario where they were more focused on that traditional sales process and not aligning it with the journey. And they're wondering how they can test that their process is consistently aligning with the customer journey now. Sounds like they're making that change in the past year.
Yeah, great question. So, and I love the word test, because this is what you got to be doing. I think you got to be testing at every stage. When you correctly identify the customer buying journey, you have, it's almost like the Jeopardy game, right? You have the answers, okay? And now we got to find the questions. So what are the answers? The answers are, we know a customer has to clearly or sufficiently define the problem or the opportunity. It sounds very fundamental, because it is very fundamental. And don't be surprised when a lot of salespeople still aren't, they're saying, I've got a stage 3 deal, but they can't clearly tell us what the problem is. They haven't done good enough discovery. So that would be a test. How well do you know have clarity around the problem? Or how well do you know clarity around the business impact? There's another test. So if you're talking to a customer, they say, man, this is driving me nuts. I'd love to get you guys in here and yada, yada, yada. Next question. So what is this problem costing the business? What's the impact to the business? What's the impact to your department? And if they can't come up with that, then frankly, it really hasn't progressed much. But there's the opportunity, right? If you can help them identify what that business impact is, now you're beginning a business case. Now, if they say that's exciting and they want to go down that road with you, then you're testing them and they're acting like a coach or an advocate. Terrific. But if they go, I don't have time for that, then you know the deal is really not gone anywhere. So I think when you define these stages by what customers need to be committing to, it's very simple. Have they committed to these things yet? If they haven't, then I kind of know where they are in the process.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Something we've done as well. And the second question, kind of related to, was because your buyer is more informed, how does this impact the stage that buyers are really entering the sales cycle? And does that stay consistent, or does it vary from deal to deal typically?
Laura, you broke up. Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, see, and I am hardwired. We just talked about this. I'm going to blame my AirPods, blame Apple. Kind of related, you said the buyer has become more informed. How do you see this impacting the stage buyers really enter the sales cycle? And is that consistent, or is it changing from deal to deal?
Well, certainly, yeah, I think they are more informed. And even though you have a construct, let's say if you map your buyer's journey, you're not mapping your buyer's journey for every deal. You're mapping it, saying when customers buy from us, they go through, these major milestone changes. Now, how they go through those, the players can change, how fast they go through can change, what the needs can change, et cetera. So there may be some situations for sure where buyers are more informed than not. They may know more about various things, the problem, the opportunity, maybe the early stages. They may know more about the business impact. They may know more about what the solution needs to look like. They have a good idea. Like if you use a personal example, if you say, I've been driving a 6 or 7 or 8 year old car, and boy, when I have enough money, I already know the kind of car I'm going to get. All right. So you already know maybe what that solution should look like. We have to be ready and engage the customer for that possibility. So we ask questions. I'll ask questions like, so it sure sounds like you're really committed to buy something from somebody. Is that true? Okay, great. And who has the authority to spend that kind of money? Okay, great. Next question. Do you have an idea of what you want, what you're looking for? And if the answer is, yeah, we do, great. So you really know where they're coming at from, hopefully from multiple stakeholder perspectives. So just asking those simple questions that are really buying journey-based questions, I think you can understand how intelligent they are regarding this particular problem. You can maybe it may seem like you're adding more value if they don't have as much information. Maybe you are, but I think you're adding even more value by saying, I get it, I hear it, I like it, let's move on. I can go as fast through this journey as you want to go. Okay, terrific. Good questions. Keep those questions coming, by the way, okay? All right, so let's now transition from customer buying journey as a basis to understanding these stakeholders to identifying and engaging these stakeholders. So, you know, I think the visualization thing is really key. I'm seeing more and more of it with my clients, even in the simplest of fashions. Obviously, what you guys do, Laura, takes this to the highest degree, but being able to see stakeholders, faces, names, titles, and maybe even more information, I think speeds up our ability and the accuracy of our diagnosing what role do these people play, how they're connected. So I think a lot of this really is initially what I would call stakeholder mapping kind of issue. Who do we know is going to be involved? Who do we think might be involved? Critical first step, as obvious as it might be. But I still come across situations where we haven't answered all of these questions. So I think this is really key to doing this. We go to websites, we go to LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn today looking at a potential prospect, and you know, with a premium level, you can see customers also viewed. And I saw a VP of a function based upon the director of the function that I actually, you know, looked up. I looked up his profile. So maybe that VP is this director's boss. I don't know, but for sure, I put that VP's name down on a piece of paper to say, maybe that's part of the stakeholder mapping. I have clients too that will say, we know that we play in 4 functions. We call on R&D, we call on the commercial team, which might include marketing and sales. We call on engineering, we call on technical. Yeah, we call on purchasing as much as we don't like to. So let's just make it simple for ourselves. From company to company, from deal to deal, if that's the case, then let's capture it and move from there. So we have a name of somebody in R&D. Well, who does that person report to? I don't know. Boom, let's find out. Either talking to that person, going to LinkedIn, or doing a bunch of different things. So I think it's fundamental, but it's also key. Secondly, the challenge of getting access to these people, difficult. So how do we engage with these people? I'm working a lot these days with my clients on how to do that. And I'll give you four ways to engage more effectively, improve your chances of getting access to, getting that meeting with these stakeholders. So number one, have a compelling message or a story, something that is really powerful, catchy, a hook. Maybe it's a guess, but if it's something related to, you know, that person's function and title and their business and their market, it's stuff like that, you improve your chances, I think. And I think it adds to your credibility when they see that you've taken the time to say, you know, this person seems like they kind of know a little bit about our business, which improves your chances of getting that meeting. Knowing something about product, application, or market, bringing some kind of insight or intelligence around that, that's a way that my clients are increasing their chances of getting those meetings. Again, it shows, you know, you're the experts in the product, and you should be pretty expert in the applications and even in the markets. Show me that. And let's have a conversation, a stage 0 conversation about not what you do in a pitch, but about product innovation, maybe. You know, what are the trends or application challenges or things happening in the market? Deploying team members. I love it that I'm seeing more of my clients doing this. Let's say, you know, you've got a quality team that you know you're going to have to call on somebody in quality, somebody in R&D, somebody in engineering, but you're just the salesperson. Even if you have an engineering degree, you're just the salesperson. So you might be able to connect with that engineering person, but why should quality take your call? Why should R&D take your call? So hopefully you have team members and you deploy them to reach out to those call points and try to get those initial stage 0 conversations going. We're having some really good success in doing that. And then finally, doggone it, you got to be a bulldog, man. I mean, it's sales. We don't have to apologize for being persistent and calling a lot and emailing, when you feel like you really have something that could be of value to that stakeholder that you want to see, never apologize for that. Always be professional, keep those core values going, but don't be a Labrador retriever, okay? Don't be a little beagle, right? Be a pit bull, all right? And you don't have to apologize for that.
Mark, I always say that desperation is unattractive.
I love it.
I gotta tell you on this is so important, and it's amazing to me. It seems like common sense. It's amazing to me how many people don't do it. As a head of marketing, I probably get 30 to 40 sales emails a day, no joke. And I ignore almost all of them. There have only been a couple I've replied to. One wasn't a good fit, but his message was so good that I replied to compliment him on it because he took the time to comment on a photo on my LinkedIn header, which is in Cinque Terre, Italy, and he recognized that. So it was a cool thing for him to call out. And the second one, it was sort of a referral. He mentioned that he had spoken to my predecessor about changing our marketing automation platform, and it actually was something that I was kind of toying with. Nobody emailed me about that, but it was nice. And I told him when he could reach back out to me. So those do work. It's a 0.1% of people that do that. And you'll stand out if you can get your teams to do that.
And the referrals, I didn't mention referrals, but you made me think of that, Laura. I mean, certainly, a referral is more like a warm lead, right? I think I heard somebody say the other day, they heard a Salesforce.com survey, 97% of cold calls do not get returned. That's a pretty collar grabbing kind of statistic, right? So I know that some people are still fans of cold calls. I'm not going to say stop at all, but the more we can do to enhance the cold call from getting through, or even avoiding the cold call altogether by making a warm call, then obviously we have to be clever and creative. Okay, moving on. So moving on from just identifying and increasing your chances of getting those initial conversations, moving on to how to identify stakeholders with high influence. So, let's just keep this simple. I think, looking at it this way, there's a financial influence that is almost always high. So back to the question somebody asked about finance playing more and more of a role in the buying journey. That's not going away. It's just not going away, right? So we got to be looking for the person with financial influence. We call that person the PFA, the person with financial authority. Miller Hyman called it the economic buyer, which is a great phrase that's lasted for decades. We got to do this. We got to find out who has financial influence, hopefully for obvious reasons. We have something with our clients we call the checkbox. So again, customer buying journey, we say when that customer is at a point in the buying journey where they're committed to buy something from somebody, they're not just thinking about it. They're no longer, kicking tires, if I can use that phrase. They have committed, capital C, committed to buying something from somebody. We say, boom, box is checked. So now that adds funnel value, which I hope I'm not getting too far off track, but it's a big deal because if we know our funnels need to be of a certain size, we don't want to muddy up our funnel value with stage 1, stage 2 opportunities where the customer's like, I don't know, I got problems. It's driving me crazy. It's been driving me crazy for 3 years. Okay, that's a good thing to know. You haven't done anything about it for 3 years, right? What's different now? But when they commit and they check that box, well, the person who has the authority to check the box, it's typically not a committee. It's somebody who has the ability to release those funds, or somebody who says, okay, we've been using XYZ incumbent, and that's a big deal maybe to kick that incumbent out and bring a new supplier in. That's not a decision taken lightly. So that's what we look for, who has that kind of authority, a pivotal stage in the customer's buying journey, right? Because if they haven't yet decided to do that, that really becomes our first sale. To eventually convince a person with financial authority that he or she should commit to buy something from somebody. You better have a compelling business case, a business impact case to back that up with. But that is how the PFA is looking at it. Is it compelling enough? If it is, boom, then we're going to move forward. If it's not, I got other things that are more compelling. So that financial influence is high. Second one is an expertise influence. So one of my clients, they're in the non-destructive testing industry. And they actually have somebody on staff who is a national expert in NDT. Well, think about if they had people that are experts, wouldn't you want to have your expert calling on their experts, if you will, in that company? Tons of credibility, tons of trust. We got to find who those people are that the group of stakeholders is looking to. What does, Mary think? What does Keisha think, right? We want to hear from her. So that's really important. Look for the expertise influence. And then there's just a vested influence, a vested interest influence, if you will. So I know this might be a little bit vague, but for a myriad of reasons, you might have somebody who just says, I'm going to get into this business. Maybe it has something to do with affecting her people, her team, something that is near and dear her heart, whatever. We need to find out who has that emotional attachment to projects and initiatives, and that basically mean they're not going to change. Who doesn't want anything different to happen? Who has a lot of influence? Because we may run into that roadblock and never make any progress until we deal with that. So these are some ways that you can, be looking for who has high authority, high influence and authority in these accounts. Laura, do we have any other questions?
We do, and I was just going to say we have a poll popping up. So as we're answering a couple, please respond to the poll related to your buyer personas. And actually, this question is very related to the poll, so thank you. Buyer personas, I was going to call out before I even read the question, was if you haven't updated them coming out of 2020, especially in relation to buying groups expanding and or changing, you should do that. Work with your marketing department; they're happy to help, I'm sure. And then this person said, we have detailed buyer personas, hopefully updated, but I don't see my team referring back to them after marketing rolls them out. How have you seen sales teams successfully leveraging these?
I'm in shock. Sales not actually using something that marketing has given them. Oh my gosh. What's going to happen next? Right? All right. So I don't mean to make light of this. This is a serious situation, but the first thing I would say is, as you know, if the person who posed this question is for marketing, better than anybody, your sales customers can be very, very difficult. So I would say, first and foremost, think about how you can get buy-in from them. How can you convince them one at a time? Not here's the memo, right? And here are our buyer personas that we've spent a lot of good time defining. How can you convince your top A players one by one to incorporate what you have come up with? You knock down a couple of your A players, boom. Now you got testimonials to say, hey, by the way, Sudeep is really doing a great job getting to stakeholders and delivering our message. Sudeep, how are you doing this? Well, and you've planted this, of course, right? But Sudeep says, well, these buyer personas have really made a difference. Terrific. So now you've made it easier to convince everybody else. So I would just look at it. It's a one-to-one sell, even though you launch this in mass with a big webinar or intra-company meeting or something like that. Definitely, I would do that. I have a similar issue with my clients that do one of our processes. We call it the funnel audit process. If we can get an A player to say, I'm an A player before Mark came along, but I really like this funnel audit process for X, Y, and Z, we take that and run with it as long as we can.
We do that to help with the adoption process too. Not to plug Revigy, but any sales technology, anything you're trying to roll out, if you can get an influencer within your sales department, somebody that's really highly thought of, to speak highly of it to his peers or her peers, that can go a very long way.
Amen. Amen. Okay. All right. Ready to move on, or do we have the poll results?
Looks like we have some results. Yep. So we have 54% of you said yes, you've updated your buyer personas. A+, good job. 25% said not yet, and then a very lucky 21% said that they haven't needed to. Okay,
all right.
So good on you with the half of you having done it. And then another question related to that coming in. I think we've talked a little bit about it, but are there key buyer personas you see being more relevant post 2020 than they've been before? And for us, it's CFOs, head of finance, and sometimes even boards. Sometimes you have to get board approval to use some of that budget. I don't know if you've seen others, Mark.
I saw that I saw that before. I saw that before the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9. I would probably default to a finance related persona, right? I mean, somebody who's really now responsible for protecting the cash and how things get spent. I think of this was actually pre-COVID as well. One of my clients, large company, multi-billion-dollar company, all software purchases had to be approved by him of just about any dollar amount. I would have, this was a company of almost 100 divisions, and they all roll up to this, this corporate headquarters, but they're all independent. The dollar value of some of these purchases was well within the range of the heads of these individual businesses, but since it was a software issue, this had to go up to the CFO. So to the CEO, excuse me. So I would say this, a more direct answer to that question: make no assumptions whatsoever. If I'd probably do you a disfavor. If I had 4 answers to give you, I would have done you a disfavor. I don't have 4 answers to give you, but I would say, I don't know. So make sure you just do your due diligence for every deal and find out who's the persona that I got to get to, who's, let's say, controlling purse strings or an expertise, or again, somebody who has some kind of a vested interest. Good habits of selling. All right. Thank you again for those questions. All right, moving on, building consensus. So hopefully you can see kind of we're funneling our way down. Sorry, I just couldn't help by doing that. Funneling our way down to really what we're trying to do is understand who's who in the zoo, understand the roles they play, get access to them, engage with them, know who's of high influence, who has that financial authority. What are we doing now? We got to work this group of stakeholders. So this phrase that, again, C.E.B. Gartner has popularized building a consensus. I couldn't resist this. I actually went back. Thank goodness I did this. I went back and watched Ozark again after several years. Oh my gosh, the second time around, I mean, I'm desperate for the next season to come out. I don't know how I'm going to survive until it comes out. So then I tried.
I think it's coming out in June.
Can't come here fast enough. So I did the same thing with House of Cards, who I thought for the first 3 seasons was some of the best television ever. Just my humble opinion, right? And then the rest of the seasons really kind of crazy, and I got away from it. But anyway, so I started with the couple of seasons again. I'm like, man, this is good writing. This is good acting. This is really good stuff. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is nobody develops and builds consensus better than Frank Underwood. He is a master at getting the people he knows he needs to get on his side, to get legislation passed, to stop legislation, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I will say this, cannot agree with a lot of his tactics. So hear me out. I'm not suggesting that you be like Frank, but if you want to get back and get a crash course, go back and watch season 1 and 2. So what we want to do in getting stakeholders aligned, and this comes out of CEB. I know I've referenced them a lot. No, I'm not on their payroll, but when I see good stuff, I like to recognize it. What they said in their 2015 white paper on consensus building was tailoring content to individual stakeholders proved to be effective. So they said, that's a good idea. The irony of that, though, was that they saw that it could actually expose some diverging interests, some conflicting interests and priorities. And so now people are kind of at each other. They're not on the same page. So that's a tricky one, because you've got to appeal to the individual stakeholders to the best you can. And at the same time, you got to try to muster all of those folks in some kind of a homogeneous blob of decision making that says, I vote for your solution and your company. So how do we do this? I think a couple things we have to be doing on this is focusing on the common ground. When you have an opportunity to talk to a stakeholder, ask them how they feel about other stakeholders. Go there. And then based on what you hear, if it feels like there's some conflicting interests there, don't jump on that objection. It may not be objecting because something is different Doesn't mean it's conflicting. However, if it is conflicting, then it's going to have to be resolved to some degree. But seek first to understand, right? And maybe you can be a bit of the broker peacemaker in there to smooth things over, especially if you need the vote of the other stakeholder that you've just learned a bit of intel about. So again, differing interests doesn't mean conflict. I just hit that. I think we need to lean into our advocates, our coaches. We need to go there. I tell my clients, you are never going to wear out someone who is advocating for you, someone who is a coach for you. You're never going to wear out your welcome. You're never going to ask them for too much because they have an interest in you winning. That's why they are advocating for you. Now, the moment they stop advocating for you and you ask them to do something, maybe now you've worn out your welcome. But lean into them for the help that they might be able to provide you. Give you intel into these other stakeholders. Strategize with them. What do you think we should do to try to bring Sarah more into our fold? Or how can we address Sarah's concerns? If you got any suggestions, or frankly, you got some really tough ones, how can we neutralize Sarah? Because we're trying to win a sale. And yeah, we'd like to play nice and everything. And again, above board, core values, never compromise the professionalism. And at the same time, if it means that somebody doesn't get what they want and we can sleep well at night, hey, you know, sometimes people lose, and we have to live with that. Leverage high influence. Obviously, that's going to be of more value than not. Knowing the culture. I've learned the hard way, which is the best way, to really stop, slow down, and understand how decisions get made within companies. You're not going to find that on a website, even if they list core values and things like that. That comes from learning from the stakeholders how they get things done. And how they get things done can change. So we got to constantly be confirming that. And, you know, I have a client that has a very, very distinct way of getting things done, a very distinct decentralized culture. And it's really neat. It's one of their secrets to success, and they are very successful. So knowing that culture stuff, I think, can help you in building consensus as well. And then finally, selling to the personal win, huge. We have a phrase we call inside the card because it's based on an exercise that we use in our training. It's kind of funny. It means nothing other than it's part of this exercise we use. So for some reason, it's more memorable as a result of that. So selling inside the card, finding the personal motivations, appealing to those to maybe help a stakeholder back off a little bit if they're blocking, or to bring a stakeholder into our fold more, you know, even more clearly. All right. So those are some ways to build consensus among your stakeholders. Laura, any questions coming in?
Yes, kind of going back a little bit, but I think still is very relevant to this slide and what you just said. With identifying those stakeholders in the map that you showed, I'm more frequently noticing that my team will think they have everyone identified and aligned, and then the deal slips in the 11th hour. How can I coach to that and course correct earlier in the process?
Yeah, I'm stopping and pausing because this has come up just in the past couple of days. I've had several clients. I've had a few clients that have had several deals that are at that end stage. And the biggest problem that we're running into is they're kind of painting themselves into a corner. They're tied behind one stakeholder. Okay, what do you do at the end of the journey when that's the case? Well, one response to that is whatever you can do, you have fewer things you can do. You're running out of time, you know, to build a relationship, understand needs, all that stuff. So the best thing to do is to avoid that from happening in the first place. So one of the things I'm trying to pound into my clients is anytime you are beginning a deal, it's a new stage one, it's a new stage three, I don't care what it is. I want you automatically default to be finding out, asking who else, however you want to ask it, but walk out of those first conversations about a deal with at least another name and maybe a couple of names. So that's one thing I would do. If it's at the end, you know, the person that you have been, you know, that horse you've been racing with the whole way around, maybe you have a candid conversation and put the burden on you and say, can I be honest with you, or can you be candid with me? What is our chance with this opportunity. You're the only person I've talked to. Blame that on me, right? I'm not blaming it on you, but it makes me a little more nervous when that's the case. And it's one of my lessons learned: be a little bit humble, be vulnerable. So maybe you can get them to tell you, hey, don't worry about it, because maybe I'm the financial decision maker, or for good tangible reasons, they can say, I've got this, and they better be good reasons. Or they might just say, you know, I'm not really sure how this is going to go. And it's not the news we wanted to hear, but it's honesty. And we'd rather have that than be misled. So you're really running out of options at that point, unfortunately. I always tell, the last thing I say is I always tell my clients, know the path to cash. So for any late stage deals, you have to know very detailed what's going to happen next, and next after that, and next after that, and next after that, and who's involved. So get that detail to improve your chances. All right, I see, Laura, our time. We probably need to move on to our last section. I think it's just a slide or two.
Yep,
Yes?
yep.
Okay, all right. So last but not least, I think a lot of this has to do with execution. In my own experience as a trainer and a coach and consultant, I've, again, learned the hard way. My greatest value really is helping my clients, not with the next greatest idea of selling. Thank goodness, because I don't have a lot of the next greatest idea for selling, but I can really help them execute better, which really is a function of reminding, of reinforcing, catching them when they're at their best, and just never, ever stopping that. I mean, there's no substitute. There's no substitute for that. Tools are valuable. What you guys provide is valuable. I mean, to me, those are table stakes. You've got to have those, and you've got to, constantly provide that reinforcement of the use of those. The person who said, we got personas, we got great personas, they're not using them. Got to fix that. You don't need better personas, right? So visibility, I think, is a key best practice when dealing with all of these stakeholders, trying to understand who's involved, who could be. Having a visualization, very, very valuable. Having a cadence within that framework, having a way to regularly talk about the deals. TopX Friday morning, right? However you do it. Having that cadence and having the same conversation, the same questions are asked every single time. You don't need to get clever with new questions when you're talking about deals. Ask the same good questions every time, and they know they're coming, and therefore they'll be prepared better with the answers. Frontline managers, their leadership, I'm not even going to go into this much. They're key. They're key. They make it sing, or they're so off key, you got to close your ears. Details. I think there's no substitute for having details. I get fatigued about people saying micromanaging and this and that. Bullshit. I think we have to know the details. And if you can bring me the details, I won't ask you about them. But if you can't bring them to me, you got to know them, because you're going to be unpleasantly surprised sooner or later. And then finally, I think accountability is a best practice. So, the best salespeople, the A players, they hold themselves accountable. So they might get a little defensive when others want to hold them accountable, but they're okay with that. So get comfortable with accountability. If you're not, ask somebody to hold you accountable. Best thing you could ever do. That's the putting the big boy, big girl pants on when you say, I need you to keep me accountable. So I'd make that part of your management and your culture as well. And
this actually makes me think of something while you're on that slide that our head of sales, Joe, says a lot, is creativity by constraints. If you supply the framework and the technology and those types of things, you can still move around within deals. No two deals are the same. Obviously, everybody knows. But you kind of have these buffers up, safeguards, so people don't go too rogue. Not that salespeople would ever go rogue, but it's helpful to have those firmly established processes.
That's a sales veteran phrase that you would expect to come out of Joe's mouth. I had a client who's years in the insurance industry, and he said, process equals freedom. So I think there's a little bit of similarity to what Joe's saying to that.
Well, we had somebody backing up your point here too. Another Joe saying the top weakness of his sellers is being single-threaded in a deal. I can't tell you how often we hear that, but when a deal slips, almost always I see the seller only captured the goals and the needs of one person, and usually it was an IT person. Oof, that's rough.
For a lot of my
But
clients, it's the purchasing. Who's your contact? Purchasing. Anybody else? No. It's like, oh man, this is not going to go well.
yeah, for sure. We've run into that several times, and I've had our customers tell us, and I know our sales team does this when we do our relationship maps, we take it back to our key stakeholder. So your point about vulnerability, ask questions. I mean, it shows that you're interested and that you care about the deal and you're trying to help your influencer or your champion, be able to purchase too. Makes their lives easier if you're talking to the right people.
I love it. I said something the other day. We talk about developing coaches and advocates. I said, we all want those people who are fighting for us. To be clear, an advocate, they're fighting for us, right? So we desperately want those. But I reminded this person, those stakeholders are looking for someone to advocate for. They want to find the solution in the company to say, this is the one I'm recommending, right? So when they see that you've done that kind of homework that you just described, that you bring this stakeholder map to them and say, hey, can we talk about this? Perfect. That person has credibility, trust, and you're likely to develop advocates and coaches when you sell that way.
Yep. I'm going to quit interrupting you because we have 2 minutes left. So I'll let you go ahead and wrap it up. But I've been having fun, so I'm sad to see it in, actually. Rare thing to say about a webinar.
Well, it's been a delight. I mean, we've covered a lot of things. We've covered a topic that I found in my own personal experience with my clients is hot, and I don't think it's ever going to go cold. The technology challenges, the pandemic challenges, the busyness challenges, they're all going to present difficulty in identifying and gaining access to and having really engaging material to hook those stakeholders. So the more we can kind of break that apart, hopefully people got some good ideas today on how to do that. Still going to take a lot of work, going to try a lot of different things. Got to be just persistent as all get out, be that pit bull, be that bulldog, and through creativity and such, and wearing people down. Frankly, I'm sorry, don't have to apologize for it. I think you improve your chances of really developing a strong strategy for these deals. So thank you, Laura. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for the host. You did a great job. Appreciate it. And you guys at Revergy, just keep up the good work that you're doing.
Thanks, Mark. You too. And for everybody that attended today, thank you for attending. Give us a second to package up the video and everything, and we will send you all a recording within the next 24 hours. All right. Everybody have a great weekend. It's almost Friday.
Adios.
Bye.